see if I can do one more before we go, maybe even two more. Gibson and Manchester City Council. Goes back to 1979. Anybody ever been in Manchester? Really? You guys look like you would be on the dance floors in Manchester. You're even the right age.
I'm from Manchester.
Oh, you're from Manchester. Okay, so we need to step carefully here. Is this a fairly good description of what Manchester looks like?
It's exactly what Manchester looks like. It's on terrace.
So, Manchester got really cool in the 80s and 90s. So I had some very good nights in Manchester in my time. But in 1979, this is pretty much what all of Manchester looked like. Pretty drab, pretty grey. And so Mr. Gibson lived in a council house, this is one of those, that was owned by the local council. Not surprising that it's called a council house. And the Manchester City Council decided that it would have a policy of trying to, instead of having lots of tenants and lots of its assets locked up on its balance sheet, that it would give people who lived in the council houses that they rented out the opportunity to buy their own home and to sort of essentially rent to buy. So that was in 1970. And Mr. Gibson basically made some inquiries, applied to the council for details of how he might buy his house. So on the 10th of February 1971, the council wrote to him and said, "We may be prepared to sell the house to you at a price of £2,180. Sounds like a good deal to me. If you'd like to make a formal application to buy your council house, please complete the enclosed application form and return it to us." So, Mr. Gibson completed the form. The form itself had a title to it saying application to buy a council house. He did leave out the price. He's thinking, I'd quite like to negotiate that, I assume. He'd been quoted a price, but he didn't put anything in there. And he signed a form that had the words on it that said, "I now wish to purchase my council house." And he got it back to them on the 5th of March 1971. Sometime after that, and before the form was processed, there was an election, a council election. New council came on board and they changed their policy. They decided they didn't want to sell these houses anymore. So they basically refused to process anymore. Mr. Gibson said, hang on a minute, I've filled out the form, I want to purchase sign something that says I want to purchase my council house. So he argued that there was already a binding agreement in place. Anybody want to represent Mr. Gibson here? I think we've heard enough from me. What kind of arguments would you run if you were representing Mr. Gibson? You wouldn't represent Mr. Gibson. Yeah, the problem is we can't choose our clients. We can't choose our clients.
Well, I would say that the price was on there.
Price was on there?
He's ended it with the word saying he would now like to buy at that price.
Yep.
And therefore, there's an offer and acceptance between the two things.
So the council have offered, they've given him a price, and he's accepted by communicating back to them that he wants to buy it. That's basically what he argued. He said the letter of the 10th of February was an offer, and his return of the application on the 5th of March was his acceptance. So he said that a binding contract had been formed, and the question he said is whether in the correspondence between the parties there can be found a legally enforceable contract for the sale of the house. So he's saying, is there enough information in this exchange of correspondence? That might be the issue. At the end of the day, you've offered it to me for that amount of money, and I've accepted it. I signed something that has accepted it, and I certainly haven't said, I might have left the price blank, but I haven't said anything to reject that. So the court said, yeah, no, I'm not even going to say maybe. This is a no. There's a well-settled and elementary principle of English law. When a court says elementary or uses the words respect, that pretty much means you're out of the water. So there's a conventional approach to ascertaining whether or not there is a contract. Firstly, we need to look at the documents. And secondly, we need to see on their true construction whether or not they represent an offer acceptance to formal agreement. Okay. So again, this goes to an extent to this idea of certainty. So on conclusion, they said that the words may be prepared to sell, and if you'd like to make a formal application to buy, made it impossible for us to find, or the court to find, that the original letter was an offer. In fact, if there was an offer at all and it was incomplete, it would have been Mr. Gibson's letter of the 5th of March, where he was making an application or an offer to buy, which at that stage the council could have accept or reject, and they chose to reject. So question whether it's an offer at all. Can you remind me of your name?
Oh, Jack.
Jack.
Yeah, is the council's letter to him, is that an offer to treat and then?
Yeah, it probably is an invitation to treat at best, and we'll talk about what invitation to treats later.
When he sent his sort of offer, was that incomplete because he didn't have the price?
Didn't have the price, it was a spade, yeah. So it probably was incomplete. Though, given that you can look at all of the correspondence, there was probably an understanding, because he hadn't actually said a different price or anything like that, you probably would have been able to get there. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because we didn't have an acceptance. SJ?
In this instance, if they hadn't, it didn't have that kind of ambiguous language, like maybe it said, we are prepared to sell to you,
we will sell
return
it
the
for
formal
£2,000 or whatever, yeah.
and he had returned the letter the same, left the price blank. You could look at the number of different documentation and it might well be a different.
And when we get to formalities and we look at construction contract, we'll unpick that more, but shorthand version, and it's a really excellent question, is you'll remember our elements of a contract. You're going to be saying them in your sleep. Agreement, which comprises offer and acceptance, and some other things. Consideration, intention, and certainty. None of those things are a piece of paper. So then, once we have all of those things, we have to ask ourselves, amongst other things, is there a formality that's required? Spoiler alert for a future class, if land is involved, you're going to need a piece of paper and it's going to need to be signed. And then when we look at that and we go through something which we call the parole evidence rule, we need to work out if we've got a written document and we've got some other conduct, can we look at the other conduct or are we restricted just to the written document? And again, spoiler alert, it's usually just the written document, but not always. How's that? I don't need to teach this course, I'm just giving you everything you need to know in the last couple of minutes.
So if they had, say, he had to send a check back to for $1 even.
Deposit?
They deposited it, and they cashed it, put it in their bank account, then they're gone.
Not necessarily. Depends on a range of different circumstances. If he'd said the whole amount and they had banked it, that could raise a different issue. If somebody else had sent part payment, we'll look at a case in relation to that a little bit later. But yeah, look, every fact we change, every lever we pull, creates a slightly different issue. What's the point on this case at the moment? Firstly is, actually you've got to look and see, is that really an offer? Or is it the sharing of some information, a pre-contractual agreement of some sort, the initiation of a negotiation? I'll see you'll come back, I need to go over here again as well. Got to think about what the document is. Don't jump straight to, is it an offer? But once we've got an offer, and this is the stuff, the invitation to treat stuff that Jack has just wrote, that kind of turns our layperson logic about where the offer is and where the acceptance is on its head a little bit. And we have to get quite disciplined at picking up what's the offer and what's other conduct that it might be. Please remind me of your name.
Louis.
Louis.
Yeah. I'll just, we may be prepared to sell it. How does that differ from the language used in an auction, where with, say, a reserve? I just don't quite.
We'll get to auction. Can I put the auctions aside? Because hopefully we'll get to them today. Depends on how much we chat. But once we go through all of the process, we're understanding, and auction is a really good way where we really unpick it to see all of the different elements. So yeah, I'll come back to that. SJ, you had another observation.
I just wanted wanted to, I just want to ensure I understand the right context to use the case. So is this one one where you're really focusing on the language, like it's because they're saying we may be prepared to sell if you would like to look at it?
Yeah, look, that's how we understand it. So the question is around, is this a case where the key point is looking at what the language is?
Yeah.
The key point, I guess, is even kind of simpler than that. We pare it back one from that. Is when we look at the conduct of the communications between the parties, we need to think about what is that communication. Is it an offer? Is it an acceptance? Or is it something else? And we necessarily need to look at the language and the context for that language to understand what it is. In this particular case, the language and the context of it demonstrates that it wasn't an offer. It was an exchange of information, a preliminary opening up of the negotiation more than anything else. And quite often, parties we'll get to latex finance shortly, where a vendor or something, the owner of something that wants to sell it, will actually structure things in a way to make sure that they get to accept an offer rather than make an offer. Because when you think about it, the contract is made when the offer is accepted. So the person who is accepting is the person in the position of strength. So if you are the seller, if you want to qualify your buyer, being able to have no contract until you say yes puts you in a position of negotiating strength. So, but it ends up doing, sorry, I'm translating in my head because I want to say a rude word. It does something with your mind when you're used to thinking about it from the point of view of I'm selling, so I'm making an offer to sell my thing, and you're buying, so you're accepting my offer. In fact, it's usually the other way around. So, no contract for poor Mr. Gibson.